So today on Superclusters, we have something really special. In fact, it's our first GP interview as opposed to an LP interview. So and for many reasons, it is a post-season episode. Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. I've read every single tweet that you've written and every single LinkedIn post.
I'll have to send you a copy of my book. So yeah,
you do.
Yeah.
I also in one of the tweets you had, you were posting like, hey, you have this book and it is multiple pages, and I kid you not, it was like, I don't know, it was like 480p video or something like that. I literally screenshotted it, then went into Adobe to enhance the image to read the chapters of that book, just to see is there anything interesting for that? So there is
nothing interesting in it, but happy to send you a copy. So it's not going to be on Amazon anytime soon. But look, I think being forced to articulate your thoughts, which is not something that I'm very good at, and doing so concisely is incredibly, incredibly difficult. I grew up with a stutter, so like now I just keep on going on and on because I'm catching up for lost time. But I think writing has been one of the ways that a bunch of my fellow peers ended up pushing me to get into, which if you look at my digital, track record, my footprint, so to speak, pre-COVID, it was non-existent. And I was in a peer circle as part of our emerging manager circle with a couple other GPs during COVID. Extremely challenging time for us all. And I just remember one of these GPs, I won't say which, she's like, "Rick, stop being such a wuss." Because I'd asked them to read everything that I wrote and should I publish this? Should I not? And 99% of content is crap. This is perhaps slightly better than crap, but you just need to stop caring. And, I do think, there's a certain fucking ship it mentality that as I work with our team to get things out there and I see LPs and GPs, you just kind of, gotta get a little less nervous about doing some of those things, especially if you have thought and intention. And it turns out that there's plenty of people who produce a lot of content that's bad and it isn't thought through. So if you're putting some thought in, you're probably beating others. But I don't know. It's been something that I found for my own personal benefit. Even if no one read it, I enjoy just writing about our value investing frameworks in venture, and hopefully they're at least helpful for our founders and our team.
Going back to the earlier thread of your writing is clearly extremely thoughtful, and which is why it makes it so much fun to read, because it doesn't feel like it's spit out by Chat GPT or AI and all that, because there's a lot of the content, whether or not it's influenced.
Although
by AI.
All my business school classmates accused me of that. They're like, "Wait, you
really?"
I pretty much assumed that you just have Chat GPT going. I was like, guys, I barely know how to use that thing. So my wife uses Chat GPT more than I do. I would say our writing actually is spit out. Our frameworks are what take ages to form. That we will. So thinking about our capabilities framework, which is an adaptation of Bruce Greenwald's concept of captivity, and how we try to basically, define what measures of captivity, to yield modes. That was something that I spent hundreds of hours of thinking through of, all right, how can we actually define what are the capabilities that would drive economic modes for companies? I'm very proud of that piece. And I think that is, something relatively novel. But the actual writing behind these things, I actually, and I encourage everyone else on our team to do this. You need to actually create a time barrier for writing a piece, create the structure. And if you can't get it done in that time frame, you need to click submit. So whenever I'm on a flight is usually when I write, because I'm okay, I have 60 minutes to write. I go to my content queue. I was here's a thought that I had. I have 60 minutes to write a blog post on it, and I click submit immediately. It's like writing a term paper. It's okay, if it arrives past 12:01, it doesn't count. You fail. And I think that has been a great forcing mechanism to really force me to be more concise and more direct. Which now my team has all these books on writing style by William Strunk and so forth. And they're okay, Rick, Like you're just giving me more homework. Like I need to do something other than venture and reading. But there's a lot to learn. So
I will say my first month in venture, this is back in 2016. I spent a whole month it was like 90% of my time was purely reading in one form or another, either threads or like Twitter tweets or books or blog posts or New York Times or research or other things. Like it was largely just consuming information and building up an information diet that could help me, be decently lean when it comes to venture. But
I think that's such an amazing thing. So when I've known that I wanted to be a venture capitalist since I was 17. I didn't know what venture capital was, but I wanted to be Jerry Maguire, like a sports agent representing talent. And then I loved reading the Wall Street Journal as like a 17-year-old, I'm kind of sick. And the nexus of those two things was you work with entrepreneurs and you're the partner to the entrepreneurs. I found that really fascinating. And then I went to a college that literally, I think I'm the only venture capitalist to ever go to the University of Richmond. If there's someone else out there, I hope that they reach out to me because I don't know. But at any rate, you go through this lineage and so forth. And when I was trying to break into venture capital, it was impossible to find information. And if you didn't go to Harvard and Stanford, where this is such an apprenticeship business, or at least formerly was, it was literally impossible to find information. So I remember I'd show up to these interviews and, I was going to the library to pick up books on how to build cap table models, because that wasn't something that we did in consulting. But I literally had to find out how to teach myself how to do cap table models. And, reading these books about, as anything I could find on the origin stories of venture capital, because things like TechCrunch didn't exist back then. So me trying to pick up trends of okay, what's happening in cloud when I worked in clean tech, which is where I started my career. That was incredibly difficult. And now there's so much content. It's so easy. And I think that's really democratizing the access to information and hopefully drives more meritocracy. There's a tremendous amount of nepotism and bias in the venture community. And if I leave this industry doing one thing, hopefully it's breaking apart some of that. But I will tell you, and what was a truly defining factor for me to decide to start Equal was I was interviewing with a top 10 venture fund shortly before deciding to start this firm. And I remember meeting with the partner who he had multiple degrees from Harvard at that point. And they had offered me a job. And he was asking me, what do you think would be challenging for my transition? And I gave some bullshit answer. And then I was like, hey, I'll feed that back to you. What do you think will be my biggest challenge coming here? And I swear to God, he says to me, Rick, do you think you'll be able to intellectually keep pace with our firm? And I was like, wow, you basically just called me dumb. And I've always heard different iterations of that. I remember interviewing with a firm when I was 24, and they said, why would I take University of Richmond and Deloitte when I can get McKinsey and Princeton at the same price? So I think I've been very focused on reading anything that I could, based on those comments to make sure that I am not going to be the intellectual underweight, in any of those conversations, which your degree is your degree. And that's not something that you can change, but your knowledge and wisdom is something that evolves over a very, very long, time horizon. And it's just amazing to see so much amazing content out there, which Michael Mauboussin has him and Charlie Munger and Bruce Greenwald have become such amazing influences on me as an investor that literally someone sent us a pack, a care package when Charlie Munger died, because if one of our LPs sent it to us because they were you must be so sad today, Rick. And I never met Charlie Munger, but Bruce Greenwald and Mauboussin were both professors at Columbia when I went there. And I didn't take their classes. I didn't know that even these people exist. And I actually was just emailing with Michael Mauboussin yesterday. And, I've learned so much from these people just from reading their books. I've still never met Bruce Greenwald. And I think that's such a democratizing thing that, that if you want to be a venture capitalist, if you want to be an LP, there's just so much information out there that you can learn, understand this business, that it used to be a walled garden. And now
Yeah.
it's much more open up for everyone. And that's awesome.
This might as well just be the recording itself, to be completely honest. But I have a couple, well, one comment and then one kind of question. I'll see the question in your mind first, which is how do you differentiate signal versus noise when it comes to content? Because you're right, there's a plethora of content out there right now, but there are so many writers, so many Substacks, so many mediums, so many beehives out there that for a rookie jumping into venture or the LP world for the first time, the wealth of information leads to a poverty of attention because they have no idea where to start. And you mentioned three phenomenal minds like Munger, Greenwald, as well as Mobison. And I'd actually put like Howard Marks in that camp as well. Like,
oh yeah, I love Howard's writing too. whenever a memo comes out, it's I got to step away and read it that day. He does some amazing stuff. I love.
What else would you recommend? Yeah, what else would you recommend?
And in terms of like what
content.
am I
like content in terms of like someone,
everyone's got to find a medium that works for them. Like,
okay,
I try to do a book every 2 weeks, and so
the Collison twins got you beat on that front.
Yeah, I don't know how they. I mean,
I don't know how they do it either.
Warren Buffett is still reading. I mean, to the level that he is. I go through Audible books. Which whenever anyone's talking about something, I just find it listening at 2.1x speed while I'm going on a run. That's not for everyone, but that is, killing two birds at one stone, learning while you're burning, is a good way to do it. So I don't know. I love revisiting books too. Like I've probably done, I'm going through Power Law right now, finishing up for like the third, fourth time. And it's just like, all right, like, every time I pick up something new, it's made me think about so many of, how we've done this massive pendulum swing in venture. And now everything that we do is fun. Is basically like very old school Excel, very old school Kleiner, like original days of venture. And like VC swung to something very, very different. And now we're just going back to like 1970s style of venture capital. Wish that we were paying those prices. That certainly hasn't changed. But I mean, hey, if it helped Kleiner get a 42 bagger fund, like, maybe it'll help us get, a 4.2, so hopefully better than that. But
that's so true. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, you mentioned an anecdote earlier when you were like applying to a top 10 VC firm and they're like, can you intellectually keep up with us? Right. There's a John from Sendbird, John Kim from Sendbird. This is the early days of it. They'd spent 4 years to get to really revenue or the first large customer. And they ended up pitching, and we might take this out in terms of names and all that, but they ended up pitching Reddit as one of their first customers. And the VP of engineering there was just like, you guys sound like really awesome. You guys are hustlers, but like you can't out hustle Redditors because we just work really, really hard. And John's like, you know what? I totally get it. I kind of folded as like, hey, it's okay if you're not our first customer, but since we're looking for an office, they had no office space. Like, since we're looking for office space, do you mind if we work out of Reddit's office? And then they would be in office like 6 a.m. every morning, all the way till like 11 p.m., if not midnight. And at some point, the security team was just like, who are these 4 Korean dudes? Like, how, like, they're not even part of Reddit. They don't have the Reddit badges. They're here all the time. It's a security hazard at this point. And us security guards, we need to go home. And he started complaining to Alexis at Reddit. And Alexis is like, I don't know who these 4 people are. Who the hell are these 4 people? And the VP engineers, I invited them over so they can work. And Alexis is like, how do we get them out of our office? Like, just go do their own thing. And it's like, well, the whole pitch was, they wanted to use us. They wanted to have us as a customer, and Alexis and the VP engineer was like, you know what? Let's just give them their contract, get them their own office. They can move out of here, and that's how they got it. They out hustled effectively Redditors because they went home later than Redditors, and they came earlier than Redditors themselves.
Perspiration is definitely a competitive advantage. And I think I had a conversation with one of my friends from business school. At our reunion, and to a certain degree, like we're very independent. We do what we do, and it's separate from like what other VCs do. That like by the very nature of our ownership that we have, and the fact that we like our companies to be capital efficient, like we don't like 80 names on a cap table. So that we like collaborating with things like EMC, because like we're kind of we're independent on our own on a lot of the deals that we do. But if you look at venture capital, and it's just such a heavy emphasis on social proof, such a heavy emphasis on networking and so forth, to ad nauseum, and I would say to the detriment of the industry. Like people are more focused on like, does this person, line up in the right social circles rather than are they a great thinker? Like, are they a great investor? Do they have great process? Do they work, really well with entrepreneurs? Like we're very much looking for social proof points rather than actual proof points, which I think is like, very something that is very specific to venture capital. And if you look at private equity and hedge fund, like, there's all these industries benefit from nepotism, at least at entry point. That the only way that you can get into those jobs usually, is if you knew someone or if you went to the right schools and had the right pedigree. But I find that people get bounced out pretty quickly in hedge fund and private equity because there's so much more data and there's so much more performance in venture. It takes too long, so like you kind of have a very long leash, and there's a lot of ambiguity on these things. So I think they lit a lot of that ride. And so I was talking to my classmate who works at a top hedge fund. And I was like, yeah, we have like New York Tech Week coming up. It's like all this networking. Like, I feel like all I want to do is get my work done. And, I want to work with their founder, work with their team. And I feel like this is like, there's 750 events and I'm getting like stolen away to do this. And it's like, I really feel like everyone in venture is about networking and not working. And we are like, it's way too much focused on networking rather than actual work. And he just says like an absolute savage comment to me that he's like, Rick, like I'm working against, like I'm competing against people who work 100-hour weeks that would sell their mother for an additional point of IRR. Like he's like, stop complaining. Like what you're talking about is a feature, not a bug. Like he's like, that's all opportunities. Like just go out hustle all those folks. And like, that's opportunity. Like why we're kind of thinking through like the next idea that we're researching or spending time with a private equity guy to understand, what's happening in the industry and how we could potentially establish a partnership with them in our portfolio companies. That's like some of the time that someone's spending on a panel or like at like the 50,000 different networking like parties that you can go to. And like, I don't know, I'd rather spend my time with entrepreneurs and customers. So,
I mean, speaking of which, if I did my homework, I actually like heard you say that you spend at least per like a company you invest in, you spend like 250 hours per year. And then by the time they get to the Series A, you go down to 150 hours. Is there rhyme and reason there? Because I'm kind of doing the back of the envelope math here. And I'm like, well, average person works maybe 2,000 hours a year kind of thing. And that's about an eighth of your time with a singular company. And that means there's only so many boards in which you can take. Like,
making the assumption that we work 2,000 hours.
I know. So like maybe it's 4,000 hours, right?
Yeah.
Like
No, I think, so we've modeled the way that we've built our firm and we've published more about this as it's become clear to us that we think it's a distinguishing factor. It's this premise of three hats. And three hats is, when I played football once upon a time, it was like, okay, we had our coach screaming at us, three hats on the ball. And, that was, the runner wasn't down until we had three helmets, like three people tackling it. And so, the reality is like everyone on the team was running, not leaving it up to one person and, to do that gang tackle. And, we're not gang tackling founders in that sense, but like we do think by bringing and staffing a team for every single company that we can provide what is just like a objectively higher as well as more volume appropriate level of service. So we've actually upped that number over time. I'd say it's probably closer to 300-400 hours that like we spend with our companies in that first year, and we staff it across multiple different people. So I spend some time with every single company in our portfolio. We have a product owner who is our industry segment leader who spends time with the company if it's their industry, and that's kind of like where the bulk of support is coming. And then we have a generalist that is really focused on kind of like the best practice type of things that would apply across all industries. So if we're doing an insurance deal, it is going to be myself, Adam, who's our insurance lead. He's been CEO of a top insurance startup. He's been in the sector for 7 years. He was a former banker, intern for me at Lightbank a bunch of years ago. And then we have Ali or Sophia, who's the latest addition to our team. And the goal and objective of that is like, okay, here's your posse, here's your team. If you're a founder, we'll give you everything that you need, but we're meeting with that team literally every single week. We're We're tracking the deliverables that we're doing for that team, in our internal engine and internal system. And we think that operating like a consulting firm, this is exactly how part of this idea came from. One of my mentors and former bosses, this guy Stanley Porter, at Deloitte. Staffing us like a consulting firm is very different than the traditional, like, there's a GP, there's a founder, and you're off on your own island. We just don't believe in fiefdoms here. And I love it. It gives me an opportunity to work with our team more closely, but it also enables us. And we did a blog post on competitive specialization of founder support. And I was trying to justify like how my utility curve was different than Adam's utility curve for different. And literally one of our LPs was like, Rick, like, are you breaking out this fucking microeconomics graph to explain like how you're staffing your team now? Like, you're overthinking this. And I was like, I'm an econ nerd.
So no, this might be a really dumb question because I'm gonna be honest, I've never worked in consulting before. So what does it mean when you say you're staffing the team like a consulting firm?
So I used to do a lot of work in the energy and utility space, and so Stanley, who's now he runs energy resources and industrials across the firm globally. So like he's had a tremendous career at Deloitte. Like he's one of the top 10 people probably in the firm at this point. And we were talking, and he probably barely remembers this conversation, kind of diagnosing some of the differences in venture capital versus like how we worked at Deloitte, where he'd bring in a relationship, let's say with the CEO of a utility, and if they wanted to do an M&A assignment or technology integration or some strategic planning thing, like he'd bring the team in, and it was always his relationship to manage. But he'd bring in the M&A guy, or he'd bring in, grunts like me who would just like run 1 billion miles an hour, who were generalists. And he'd bring in someone who had sector specialty. Everyone on the team had sector specialty, but functional special skills. And for us, that's our product owners who understand insurance, understand energy, retail, and supply chain. And then bring in generalists who could, really work on that. So I'd be staffed on different assignments all the time and on different teams. Stanley was usually one of the guys that I worked for. Sometimes I work with Alex Kasuya, Demoy Reg, Garrett Gephardt, all these other, different folks that, 10 years later, we're all in different spots. But as I think of that, like, you got to learn from other team members, and it wasn't just one person working on behalf of a client. It was really a team effort. And I think that left our clients feeling like they were, getting the best of the best when they hire people, not just asking people to figure it out, but it also enabled the team to really lean in on not being jack of all trades, but like doing what they were exceptionally good at. So Stanley was really great at selling business, really great at managing relationships, incredibly strategic mindset. Have Stanley focus on that rather than building financial models for clients. That was my job. I did a lot of that. Bring in people who could just focus on like, hey, I understand M&A better than anybody else, or I understand HR transformation better than anybody else. That's the way that we think. Like, our product owners don't spend any time focused on anything else that's outside of their sector. And that just enables them to be like extremely acute, surgical, lethal in those tasks. And our generalists, they're developing their own functional specialties, in terms of thinking of like, okay, like Ali is very good at market product oriented. Sophia, very much biz ops, like fin ops, like, she's just a tank that runs 1,000 miles an hour that like will build your whole fundraising deck overnight. And like, she will work till 4 o'clock in the morning to get that done. And I think that's, their own specialties that they're doing. So I don't know. That's not how I've ever seen a venture fund run, and we'll see whether it works out, but it's the way that we're going to run our firm.
But I want to talk about like 3 things over the course of this conversation, and I want to make sure we have those markers for that. One, I'd love to talk about like the founding story of Equal, because I think that is extraordinarily powerful, and to show that even in 2018, which is some people, I'm using quotes, but like some people might say like it might have been a better time to fundraise than it is today in 2024. Who knows? It's always hard, right? Like if you're trying something new, if you're trying something like transcendental and ambitious, like it's always going to be hard. But I'd love to talk about the founding story of Equal. And then 2, you have a lot of hot takes that I've kind of taken notes on. We'll probably just use those as markers in and of themselves. And I'd like you to expand outside of just the 140 characters, so to speak. for those hot takes, because I think those are really interesting in general. And then third of which, if it'll be helpful, and we might even end up starting with this, is like early days, like pre-Equal Ventures, like, B school kind of like Rick. I want to talk about those days because I think those are really just interesting on a human level as well. And that's part of the reason I do the pod as well. So
let's start there. Sounds spicy. Yeah.
Let's start there. So you mentioned something, and I forget if it's actually in the recording or if it's like before I clicked record, but you said back in the day, you used to have a stutter. And if people have met you today, people have heard you on podcasts, seen your writing, you are by far the most eloquent, well-spoken, well-written individual out there. And these are my words, not your words.
When you do a tee up like that, I'm just destined for failure now. Like now I'm going to be tripping over words. My stutter's going to come right back at me.
So what was it? So in all curiousness, like what was it like having a stutter, and how did you overcome that in your early days?
So yeah, I grew up with a speech impediment. I grew up with a stutter. I grew up dyslexic, and I didn't learn how to walk till I was like almost 4. So the reality is, my parents almost put me in like a special needs program, and I've kind of figured out my way across all these things. Doctors said that I would never run, and I played sports in college. I've run marathons. I don't know. I think when you're faced with challenges, you can either let them take over you or you can take over them. And when I had severe challenges speaking and articulating when I was coming up, I kind of felt that the only way that you could overcome that was through kind of repetition and brute force. And that's probably not the healthiest behavior, but the reality is, like, I took an internship just doing cold calling all summer. And by the end of that, your stutter goes away. Like when you make, 200 phone calls a day, you're going to learn how to articulate your thoughts, and the scripts that we were reading were not particularly, thoughtful. That said, I do think just that repetition and spending that much time on a phone, really brute forced and kind of made that problem, dissipate for me. And I could still see it, manifest every time to time. But, I do think that the more repetition that you do on these things, much like, okay, I told myself I wanted to run a marathon. It was something that, given my physical challenges when I was younger, I was like, look, I'm not in shape to do those type of things, but like, this is a goal. It's a completely accomplishable goal that is 100% controllable by me. And I trained insanely for like a year, and like my knees and ankles are all kind of screwed up, since then. But the reality is, like, it was something I could accomplish. And, so I think developing that grit and resiliency to push through challenges is just something that, it's something that I'm really hopeful I can bestow on my kids. It's something that we definitely, spend a lot of time here, like assessing with our founders is, people who are faced with adversity and how do they push through that, opposed to, if you're kind of born in a white glove world and never face hardship, what happens that first time that you do? And that's not something I would want to invest in. So,
and this is to scratch my own itch here, but what was it like? Because you mentioned that your lower half of yourself, like, knees, ankles, and all that are less than ideal right now. What was it like pushing through to do a marathon? And like, how long did it take? What was the quote unquote
pain is progress, man. I think like, that was, part of, I know.
That sounds like the Navy SEALs.
Ray Dalio.
The Navy SEALs boot camp at the very, like, if you walk in, there's this like quote at the very top that says, "Pain is weakness leaving the body." That sounds like one of those quotes you see at one of those.
Look, I think feedback loops are something that, inform almost everything around us in behavioral psychology and behavioral economics. And, I think, Ray Dalio's Principles book was one that, like, I haven't read it in several years. I should go back to it. But like the concept of feedback loops in your own personal life and how you lean in on those, and failure and strife is part of how you create, knowledge and strength. And, so for me, like I'd go and I'd listen to a book for 4 hours on a treadmill during, February. And when my wife and I were in Washington, D.C., we ran it together. My wife is a cancer survivor. She had cancer in the lower half of her body. And I think that was like extremely taxing and emotional for to do that, but we trained for that together. Nothing like an engaged couple training for a marathon to like nearly break you up. I think going through those type of experiences, like really driving yourself to do something that I was overweight, still am, and people look at you like, you've run a marathon. I was like, yeah, like I meet your time, I do think being able to go and do those things, like that's something that's 100% in your control. I think there's so much in life that's out of your control. Like I couldn't control whether I was going to be D1 football player, or whether I was going to score a goal there or whatever. There's too many interdependencies, but there's so much in your life that you can control. And I do think, that's all you can do. And I'm a big believer in, you don't let the dice roll you. Like you can control, your situation as much as you can. And then, at that point you're dealing with, luck and inspiration, but, control what you can. And, it turns out if you push yourself, and my wife and I both push ourselves, and our firm pushes ourselves very hard, you can often accomplish a lot of things that people are like, wait, how's that overweight guy who's like 200 pounds and 5'10", like running a marathon? Surprise people.
You don't look 200 at all.
I'm now a trimmer version of what I was in my younger days. So I'm probably 30 pounds lighter, maybe 35, 40 pounds lighter than when I ran the marathon. Okay. I am in no rush to run another though. So we'll put it that way.
Anyone who has ever met you or is watching this video, like when you said, I was overweight and I still am, the reaction from me internally was just like, Rick, you don't look a single ounce overweight, at least from what I'm seeing above the camera. And we've met in person before, and you were dapper, and I was like, you look like you were in good shape.
Yeah. And the reality is I've been overweight almost all my life. And now I finally have enough balance in my life to kind of get things under control and be in a position that I feel like I can live healthy. For the last 15 years, I've been on a treadmill of life, which I went into consulting and literally everyone in consulting knew Rick is going to be the first person out of here. Rick is going to go into something he's not a fit to be a part of a 100,000 person firm. And I was actually one of the last people to leave Deloitte, principally because no one in private equity and venture capital would hire me. But everyone knew that I wanted to do that. And it was just a matter of when. And then those opportunities never really surfaced. MBA became the pathway. As I look through all the unhealthy habits that I've had over the last 15 years of no sleep, drinking way too much coffee, even in high school, I was drinking a pot of coffee a day. It was going from
How?
I've always kind of been a maniac. I go from playing football in the fall to trying to cut 30, 40 pounds for wrestling. And, and doing things that, I told myself I had to take every single AP class that was by the time I was a junior. And to my own detriment, my grades suffered because I just put a lot of pressure on myself. And I look at the 15-year arc, Deloitte. Okay, I'm running 1 billion miles an hour. I need to figure this out. MBA, I worked full time at a private equity firm and then in venture while I was getting my MBA. Had to figure out a venture job. Knew that Lightbank was not going to be my long-term home. That was not going to be the place that I was going to work for the next 30 years. Had to figure that out. As we go launch this fund, I probably averaged 3-4 hours of sleep. And my daughter was born on a Friday, and I was in the office on Monday at 7:30 for an LP meeting. And when you look at the impact that all this has on your body, now I finally actually feel we're at at least homeostasis that I can focus on being healthy, being with my kids. And it's, hopefully it makes us more productive. I still need to work on the sleep, but I've gone from 2 venti coffees a day to 1. So hopefully that puts us in a better position. So
that's a better improvement. But it's also I'll be honest, you're in the Starbucks camp, and I really never really understand which one's grande, which one's venti, which one's some other one.
As long as it's not Dunkin'. You have
a lot of Dunkin' in your side of the world.
In New York is definitely not a Dunkin' zone. So
No, I swear I see
I'll
Duncan
leave.
like
One of our
every
people
stretch.
is from Boston, and like so he drinks Duncan, and you know, I'm too much of a Yankees fan to have Duncan in our office. So.
Okay. Well, on our side of the world, here in the Bay, we have like what Phil's, Pete's. We do have Starbucks.
You guys
and all
have
that
fancy
stuff.
coffee. So,
We have Blue Bottle, and then down in LA, there's Erewhon, like the $30 cup of coffee. I mean, I don't completely understand that. Anyways, so everyone at Deloitte knew you wanted to be like at a smaller institution, probably in venture. At 17 earlier, you also mentioned that you were like, you wanted to be the Jerry Maguire and you're reading Wall Street Journal at the same time. You've known you wanted to be in venture for a while, but what turned the switch when it went from I want to get a job in venture to I want to do my own thing? Like, was there an inflection point or a moment that inspired that?
Yeah. So if you ask like my classmates in business school, like everyone kind of knew that this is like where I wanted to be. And I think anyone who's ever worked with me at a venture firm like knows it too. It just through happenstance, I've worked now at 4 first-time funds. So my first job in private equity was a group that spun out from a growth equity firm to start a private equity firm. I was the first hire, and being part of a very, very small team, going after winning a deal, having to raise money, like that was a really, really cool experience. I'm not a private equity guy. I'm probably more of a private equity guy than most venture capitalists are, but I can look to the left and right and see my classmates who worked at, CDR or KKR. I was like, these guys are better at this than I am. And, my second first-time fund was working at Bowery Capital. My job offer, for the summer internship came from AOL Ventures, and then, AOL Ventures became Bowery Capital as they spun out. And, I was the first MBA intern, working with Mike. Ironically enough, the other guy that I worked with that summer, Paris Heyman, is the GP at Index now. So Mike, knows how to recruit some venture talent, I guess. At least one person, because Paris is a lot better than I am. And then
you're too modest.
Yeah. Nah, no way, man. And then when I finally graduated, I joined Lightbank, which was part of their first fund. I wasn't there at inception, but it was still like a very new fund. And being part of that, you just kind of see things doing differently. And I had interned at First Round and interned at Foundation Capital as well, and done some work for those firms, but it was very, very different. But during business school, Rothenberg Ventures was kind of taking off, and like this concept of emerging management. Rothenberg obviously took off and it exploded like a Zeppelin. But the reality is we brought together when Patrick Chang, who's also a first-time fund manager running a fund called Dispersion Capital in the Web3 space, him and I were co-presidents of the VC Club together. And both of us were extremely fascinated with all these people who were starting firms. And that seemed like, if you go back to the history or like read things like Power Law or, read eBoys, these early days where people are like mavericks starting their own firms. I thought so fascinating. So we did a conference back in 2013, 2014 called for our annual private equity venture capital thing, with entrepreneurship as an investor as the theme. And everyone we recruited was the founding member of the firm. We had the founders of, Kanan and Leon Black from Apollo, which, very, very different where he is today than what he was, 10, 12 years ago, founders of True and, all these other, amazing venture firms. And I just found that so interesting, and to see all these people who, were successful in doing their own thing, but now they could invest with their own style approach. So Patrick and I actually tried to start a fund together with another person, Shruti Gandhi, who now runs a fund called Array. Ironically enough, all of us now run our own funds, but that didn't take off. And when I left Lightbank, which would have been like 4 or 5 years later from that moment, Eric told me as I, gave him my resignation, he says, "Rick, you've had like tattooed on your forehead that you were going to start your own fund since the first week you were here. It's like, this is always what I knew what you were going to do. Like, I'm glad you're finally doing it. Like, God bless you. So I think like if you feel confident in your point of view and you feel like you're an outsider, and I've always been an outsider. Like, the reality is like, I would not fit in virtually any other venture firm other than what we are. And that's because like what we invest in, what we think, and, our culture is very different. Like, we are largely a non-Ivy school, like place here, and I think having we're the band of misfit toys, and we love that.
Obviously, this is on the hindsight bias 2020 and 2021 era where everyone wanted to start their own fund. Like every brother, sister, cousin, uncle, aunt wanted to start their own fund, right? What was the conviction you had that you're like, I have a thesis that I'm willing to bet on that would hopefully be differentiated across the industry that is enough to start a whole fund around?
When I was at my prior firm, I was fortunate to hit some nice outcomes. And, I backed 11, 12 companies there, either as an angel or like via the fund. The two investments that I made that were not part of Lightbank were Project 44 and a company called Work Garage, formerly known as Bowery Capital. Both those companies are worth, call it $2.5–3 billion now. So, the reality is I went through tracking every single investment that I ever brought forward, ever looked at, and I would stack rank them. And I started to see that, I was becoming a good picker. Too early on track record, but I had a couple of sizable exits fairly early in my career. And so I felt that this was something that I could potentially be decent at. But I also started to realize that the style of investing that I did was very, very different than the way that traditional venture firms operate. And for a long time, it was just my belief of this is how I do things, and it's very different than what other people are doing, and very, very much struggled to articulate that. But it felt like this was just a playbook that I was going to operate. And then there was a book that I read in 2016, 2017 called Technology Revolutions in Financial Capital by Carlotta Perez. And that was the thing that really put a light bulb and told me that this could actually be the start of something completely different, and that I would really regret it if I didn't take the opportunity to be part of that transition. And Carlotta has written a book about how innovation cycles around modern history all kind of follow the same traditional 60 to 90 year S-curve of an installation phase, that it's really about the technology development and some epochal innovation event. Think Fairchild Semiconductor or whatever, or Henry Ford, Ford with the auto, or Thomas Edison light bulb, some invention that happened, and then a tremendous amount of technical risk that investors were taking as part of the growth of that movement, the wave starting to start its hype cycle behavior. And as I think of venture capital and information technology, generally speaking, over the last 60 years, it's been basically that. It has been people underwriting technical risk, engineers. If you look at early days of Kleiner, it was all about taking massive technical risk, and that's where they found the mode. And Tom Perkins talking about how do we de-risk the white hot risk, and that is what venture capital was. It was engineers. They'd recruit professional management teams to come in to run these companies once the technology actually worked, but it was people who could understand the technology and those core skill set. Amidst that, technology starts becoming more mainstream, and you start to see this turnover in society. And we can talk more about what happens in those, but it was very evident that we were starting to see that turning point happen, because it leads to income inequality, rises of nationalism, populism. This stuff has persisted, but across every single turning point over the last 350 years, this turning point, rise of nationalism, populism, inequality, has coincided with that turning point. And that's been, unfortunately, something that has been very persistent across the last 6 years, and something that gave me a lot of confidence that we were experiencing that turning point. But if you look at what happens after that turning point, it's something that Carlotta refers to as the golden ages. And this is where technology is being deployed across the society. And it's actually a fundamentally different investor. It's a fundamentally different type of entrepreneur. It's not people who are technical. It's actually people who understand industry, understand production value, understand economic value. Looks much more like people who come from private equity, hedge fund backgrounds, who are going in. You can think of real estate booms post, automotives becoming cheap enough that they became accessible to everyone. The real estate and manufacturing industries that populate the suburbs actually is where all the money made, far much more than what Ford made during that. Or if you think of the growth of energy infrastructure and electricity in the U.S., immediately after what happened with Thomas Edison, then the countless economic value that's been developed not from the energy industry, but because you have low cost energy and transmission grid infrastructure that enabled everything else in industry. My belief and our belief as a firm is that we're at the early stage of that movement. And we have largely backed non-technical founders. We are an immensely non-technical team, but we have built our team to really on this belief that there's this deployment phase and built the playbook around doing rigorous research on these industries, partnering with networks in these. We operate a lot like a private equity light firm, with minority stakes. We really, really focus on playing that playbook. And the bet 6-7 years ago was that if this golden age was really happening and we were the only firm that operated this, we could carry the torch for 30 years. We'll see whether that happens. It still has not, we're in early days, but I know what we're doing is different, and I know that I couldn't do it at any other firm.
That makes a lot of sense. And going back to what we mentioned earlier, raising Equal Ventures Fund 1 was not an easy thing. And
impossible.
It was, you've hit a lot of roadblocks, and at the same time, and if I did my homework right, as someone who's raised your first fund while your wife was pregnant, amidst moving cities from Chicago to New York, and as someone who self-described himself as broke and living in a hostel.
And my mother-in-law had pancreatic cancer, so let's add that onto it. So,
and your mother-in-law had pancreatic cancer, and you were living in a hostel for $25 a night a week after your daughter was born to pitch a large university endowment. This may be a silly question altogether, but what kept you going?
The only way is through. At that point, like the alternative to not raising that fund was like moving back in with my in-laws. And that was, objectively like just packing up the tent. And so, we put every dollar at risk, to make that happen. Like, I had to make loans to the fund to be able to, because we didn't have enough money to make one of our first investments, that we had to take, dollars out, to pre-fund capital calls to do that. So I made actually, did a 6-figure check, of my own personal capital on an interest-free, basis to fund a commitment for one of our companies, Threeflow. And thank God it did, because that company has become an incredible company. It's one of the biggest value or biggest drivers in our fund. But that was incredibly scary at the time. And it was something that we had to do before we showed up at that university endowment IC, was to show that we had like written some checks. Fortunately, Emergence Capital worked that one up shortly thereafter. Emergence Capital at the A, Excel at the B. Emergence just led another round in the company. But the reality is, like, there was a pretty high chance that we were going to fail. But even at that, if it was a $10 million fund, $14 million fund, our initial target was 30, it got bumped up to 40, 55, but that took nearly 2 years to get done. And the reality was, if a couple of things broke the other way, that fund would have been 14 million. And, I would have had to find a way to make it work, because there was literally no other option. So we made it work. We got to the other side. We were fortunate to get a bunch of markups in that fund leading up to the tail end of it, which helped that get raised. But, unquestionably, I think I put on like 15, 20 pounds during the course of that, fundraise. I spent, probably 2 weeks of it working at Johns Hopkins ICU, waiting room where, as ambulances were coming in and out of the hospital, I was on the phone with an LP with my like 6-month-old daughter, and he was like, "Oh, what's all the background noise?" And I'm like, "Oh, hustle and bustle of New York City." Like, we could not show weakness to LPs, because I think that would have actually further deterred, people from investing. Like, look, this guy has so many other distractions going on, like, which, all these other folks in venture are killing it, and they're staying at the Four Seasons. And, I'm finding myself like taking out LPs and like trying to figure out like how I can take them to a place that I could afford, because like I was broke. And so, we were staying in hostels. We were taking Greyhound buses up and down the East Coast. And, I think as I think of the relationships that I have with our LPs now, and as I think of the relationships that, we forged with LPs, there are so many people who treated that dynamic, which this was still a little early in an emerging manager, like pre-2020, like there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. And, I had people scream at us for not bringing printed binders to their office. I won't shame that LP, but he will certainly never be an LP and equal. That for a third meeting, wanting printed binders, laminated binders, for that, which the people throw them out immediately in the trash. And that was a guy that I knew for multiple years. I had people say, "Hey, can you get down to DC? Next week I want to get you a meeting with the CIO," and then I'd show up. It'd be a meeting with 3 interns, and just massive time wasters. And I think there needs to be more empathy on both sides of the table. That a lot of people think VCs live this extremely plush lifestyle, and plenty of them do. But if you're an emerging manager, you are always broke. And the reality is we didn't really have any other alternative than finding a way to make it work. And if it meant that it was only going to be one of us, if it meant that we had to do a smaller fund, at that point, this was my only option. I turned down the job offers that I gotten. It was very public that this was what I was doing. And my wife was not making enough money to float that. And literally the option would have been, all right, we're moving in with your parents, and venture didn't work out. Go figure out what's going to be next, Rick. And would have had a nice, midlife crisis at the age of 30. Fortunately, we got it done, and we've gotten the next one done. But man, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. That was a terrible, terrible time.
It's also an important reminder, especially to not only the LPs in the audience, but just anyone else in the audience, that I think Chris Duvos said it best when we had a season 2 episode, and he used the word sonder, which was a fairly new word in my dictionary, but effectively means that it's the realization when you realize that other people live as robust of a life and as equally as complex of a life with the highs and lows that you go through that you do. And oftentimes it's easy when you have a lot of luxuries afforded to you that you forget that other people live very complex lives and robust lives altogether. So, just a reminder.
I think COVID actually was remarkable in, exposing that. And I think I'm hopeful that anyone who had to go through that, especially anyone who had kids during that, my daughter was 10 and a half months old when we had lockdowns in, New York City, which we announced our fund, I want to say March 5th, so terrible time to announce a fund. I remember start of 2020 having a conversation with my wife. We're okay, the baby's sleeping now, funds raised, we're going to announce we're finally off that hamster wheel. We can actually enjoy it. And then COVID happens. We're oh fuck. We had to, go down to Virginia to be close to my mother-in-law, which her recovery through pancreatic cancer was, daring to say the least. Lost multiple grandparents, but my wife and I raised our kid the entire time. And as I spoke to other emerging managers, all of us were very much at a breaking point. And I think for LPs, they certainly had a very stressful time looking at all these different positions. But I don't think there's as much awareness around how close so many great GPs I knew were to absolute breaking. And I was pretty close to the point of breaking myself. I was probably sleeping 3.5 hours a night, trying to keep the firm together while raising my daughter. My mother-in-law was not in a position to provide any childcare support. My wife works in real estate private equity now, and obviously that was she does affordable housing, and what was happening with tenants, it was scary, in something like COVID. And so both of us in these massively COVID inflicted industries trying to raise a child, and basically being okay, we're in a really tough spot. And it was actually that really forced me to have much more authentic conversations with my peers. And I had a peer circle, and that was part of the emerging manager circle, and why I care so deeply about that group. But it was me and 4 or 5 other GPs that were all going through the same thing, and just finding ways to be very open about what was happening in our life. One was going through a divorce. One was, living in a place that, that was one of the most COVID afflicted towns. Just going through all that stuff together and realizing that this person isn't just a Twitter account, but a real person who, despite having an amazing track record and all that stuff, is dealing with all this. And I think that has been probably like, if I had to find something that was like the biggest delta between me and 5 years ago, it's just like being more authentic, being more open about what is happening like in your life, and not just trying to be, the wonder bread, like the lowest common denominator, like what you think people want you to be, which, as I think of, that's hard when you're trying to raise money. It's hard when you're trying to appease, the industry, because the reality is like they want a certain profile. They don't want weakness. They don't want complicated. They don't want, they want something that fits the, profile. Like, hey, Harvard, GSB, Sequoia spin out, like, that gets funded pretty quickly. And I think we were, very, very different than that. But I'm also like, as you can tell, I'm a basket case. But I think at least now we are more willing to show, what is really going on, and just being very like authentic and real about it. And, whether LPs like want that or whether they don't, but I really encourage that type of kind of openness. And I think it's maybe a happier person, and I think it's maybe a better investor. But the reality is I still know it's such a challenge for so many people who feel like that they need to fit the box. And that's really crippling to a lot of folks.
So I'm actually glad you brought up the emerging manager circle, because I did want to talk about that as well. You've obviously grown the community to, if I did my homework right, like 600 or so, even higher, 700, 800?
Yeah, we're about 750 people now.
750.
Which is amazing.
That is insane.
Yeah.
But you've built such a great community.
And probably about 200 LPs on top of that like are active members of our community, like, attend a bunch of our events and so forth, which has been amazing. So, and
I think it's important to caveat as well, because just because you have a certain number doesn't mean they're all active. So the fact that you have like 200 active LPs who are actively engaging the community goes a long way. But everyone, to be completely honest, as of now, is trying to create their own version of an emerging manager circle, right? Whether it's a GP or an LP. And the way you've thought about it, if people couldn't tell already, like you've been very intentional and thoughtful about creating that circle of individual. But like, what sets EMC apart?
Yeah, I wish I could say it was as thoughtful and intentional. I mean, legitimately, the circle started because we had a really nice office space that someone gave us and said, hey, it would be really awesome if you could bring a couple of VCs by as we're giving you this free office space. So yeah, like we got pizza and, some beer and wine, and, we like all talked about how difficult it was for our fund. And I had gotten into Kaufman, but I couldn't afford it. Like, obviously, like, starting this fund was, didn't have money to pay for rent, let alone like something like Kaufman. So I viewed this as, buying a copy of Reboot by Jerry Colonna, which is a fantastic book that like I read like 4 times, during the course of COVID. And, he basically stole the, peer circle framework that he had and said, okay, like, let's do this once a month. And that group kind of grew and expanded. And then we started inviting LPs and GPs to be in the group. But I think one thing that it was a core learning and lesson that like we've really tried to adhere to is confidentiality and making sure that this can be a trusted environment, which I think that's really hard to maintain when you're at scale. And we've maintained it. I think, if someone, says something that is, voiced in the group to an outsider, I immediately kick them out. We host LPs for extremely off the record confidential conversations. LPs live extremely private, or work extremely privately. Some of these are family offices that don't want to be known about outside of that. So being able to have everything off the record, have it not publicized, has been a great way to make sure that we're enforcing trust. And I love the fact that people will talk about extremely complicated and challenging things, that there aren't ways to get information on that. And especially if you're an emerging manager that comes from outside, the traditional, places in venture capital. Like when I went to go raise Fund One, I didn't have people who were, mentors, introducing me to LPs. Lightbank didn't have any LPs. I didn't have, a mentor who could, show me the ropes and all that stuff. I had to learn from my peers, or more precisely, people who were like 3-4 years ahead of me. So as I thought about that, like having a place where you can ask dumb questions, really actively learn from each other, especially, if you don't have those networks, it was so important for us in those early days, as well as important to like my own, personal and mental health, like being able to have a channel where I felt everyone else was going through the really difficult things that I was going through, where like we were, people were offering up their couches, like, and be like, hey, like, if you're in San Francisco, like, and like you need a spot because like hotels are too expensive, like, we had a pitch with Mark Andreessen at like 8 a.m. in the morning. He did an investor fund. And I was like literally staying at another emerging manager's couch the night before, did not look great for my meeting because like I was probably most uncomfortable couch that I've ever slept on. But reality is moments like that of camaraderie of like, how can we actually help each other? People very rarely talk about deals and all the other transactional stuff. It's much more, how are we dealing with this HR issue or this legal thing? Or I'm really struggling to get to, and showing some vulnerability, is a real big point of that. And during COVID, where I actually felt like I was having enough people come to me and say like, Rick, like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I think I need to shut things down. Like, I am like really at a breaking point. Like, I probably had 200 conversations like that. People who were like, assume that we had our act together. Like, and, we're coming for some guidance from like someone who like, now I can reflect and say like, being more open about like how much chaos was going on in my life is, I think, an important lesson for folks to like think about. But like, I did a session with Jerry Colonna in front of the entire group. And like, that was terrifying that like Jerry hopped on and it's like, so who thinks I can make Rick cry in the first 5 minutes? And like, like I won't comment as to whether I did or not, but like, people are like, is Rick really going to do this? Like, and I did it to prove a point. I did it to show that like, okay, it's okay to show vulnerability here. And, I had one of our anchor LPs actually walk through the entire underwriting decision of like, hey, like, here's what we did to show people like how hard and challenging that process was. And like, for us to be more open together. And for what it's worth, like, we asked, what do you think the biggest risk was in this fund? They stated it 100% manifested. They were right. And reality is like, going through that exercise, I wanted to create an environment where like you could be unusually raw. And I think we've maintained that with our emerging manager circle events where like every year someone cries on stage. Like, and like, I love that. Like, it's all off the record content. We don't ever speak about like what was said there, but like people are looking around the room at someone and like seeing friends. They're seeing 100 other GPs and a bunch of LPs. And I've been shocked at how bearing some of the content has been at it. And I do think that like creates more openness and trust. So I think everything in life is a flywheel, but like my hope with that group is that openness and trust like keeps on perpetuating. And like, at some point, like we get bigger and bigger and bigger. I want to cap the size that we get, but I also want to make sure it drives as much benefit for the folks, who are there and want it to hit as many people as possible. But I think openness and trust and vulnerability is hopefully more present in our group than it is in other things, and that people can look at it as a safe haven for that.
And so I'm really curious, just because on the side, I host a lot of events as well. And this is obviously to scratch my own itch here, but it's easy to say that you want to make things confidential, vulnerable, off the record and all that, but it's hard to actually do. And I'm curious, since you mentioned that you don't have to name any names, you don't have to mention the topics or anything, but are there structural things you do at these get-togethers, at these conferences, where it helps people cry on, not saying you have to make people cry on stage, but helps people cry on stage and be more vulnerable? Because I imagine you don't have every single conference where Jerry Colonna comes on stage like, hey, can I make this next person cry on stage?
No, I think people are just crying because I'm the one asking them questions. So maybe I just make people cry. I think when a space is known as a safe space, it enables you, and I provide all the questions to everyone in advance. And I make all our speakers like, hey, like, I don't want to bullshit. And like, let's talk about the real things and let's talk about it complicated. And I'd say some people are just like, no chance. I'm not willing to talk about that. I was like, okay, like, let's go in a different direction. And then some people are like, I want to grab the bull by the freaking horns. Let's do this. And like, I would say that a couple of our conversations, people knew going in that they were going to go there, and left it feeling so much emotional weight taken off them through that. Like I received like a thank you note from someone after, and we're talking about like an 8-time Midas lister, like one of the most incredible investors that like I deserve zero right to be on stage with that person, but they were so appreciative of having an opportunity to actually say something in the open that had been something that like had really been impacting their entire career, and they were on the back. They were essentially done with venture at that point, and just being able to kind of communicate that vulnerability was something that like they felt as like a big emotional lift for them, and that was like a very special moment for me. Being able to go and like actually not just have what like is great content, like that's not the point. It was like to share that moment on stage where someone like showed true vulnerability of someone who is just like, man, that person's perfect. Like that person is a Midas list investor, just one of the best. They must have everything figured out. And then when they're talking about their own emotional, complex, deep shit, like I was like, wow, like this is a moment that I will never forget with this person. And I'm thankful for that. So I think I'm hopeful that continues to drive and perpetuate like new, interesting, impactful moments, because it's like, really, how do we pull those out and like stop bullshitting? Like, and what are the AI trends in 2024? Like, who cares? Like, there's other places for that. Like, I want to talk about the real shit because this is hard. And if you're an emerging manager, this is your baby. Like, I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, it'd be like Sutton, Hayes, and Equal, because those are my 3 kids.
First of all, did you know, and let's take this Midas person out of the list for now, but like, did you know going into some of these conversations what people were willing to be vulnerable on, or did it come up on stage almost serendipitously?
We knew what were going to be the complicated questions, and that's actually the reason why I sought them out. Like, and saying, hey, like, I want to talk about this. Like, and if you're willing to talk about that, I think that would be an amazing opportunity for people to learn. And there's not going to be any media there. There are going to be a lot of LPs, so it's 100% up to you to do it. And again, some people are like, yes, I think this would be amazing to talk about. Like, and some are like, zero chance. Like, if you want to talk about that, no. And is it completely cool? So I never want anyone to go to a place where they're uncomfortable, with the conversation. And I think making sure that, I consider my overly consulted, interview template that I use for these things, which, is hilarious how much it's been like structured. But I do think, I've seen my moderator like template, because I speak at a lot of, I've seen this come full circle, and actually someone sent it to me. I was like, this is my template. But at any rate, I think people having full awareness of what they're getting, puts them in a state that they actually can be like, okay, like I need to get ready for this to talk about this, opposed to like if they're on guard because they're speaking to a journalist who like they know will have some gotcha, and that puts them in a very, very different spot. So, but yeah, I don't know. I'm as I put together the agenda for this year, like I'm trying to think of like what are the growth lessons that we can learn from each other of complicated things that happen that enable people to hopefully avoid some of the hardship that they went through, for others. Because I look at some of the folks that we have, like, speakers this year, Andy Lamont from OKCFT, Gordon Ritter, like Selma Shaw, Chris Farmer. These are all like incredible investors, but, how can we click into the complicated moments that like show that even, I've never heard this term Sonder other than the company, kudos to Dubos, for bringing out, but like, how can we show that complexity that even these people who like, Gordon's had one of the best enterprise investments of all time, and what can I find that's like complicated that like we can learn from Gordon's failures, albeit very few of them, but if Gordon has failure, like again, pain is progress. And, what is the pain that Gordon went through to get to the progress that he's had at this point? And how can we as a group learn from it? I think that's a powerful thing.
I mean, you already have a lot of signups you may have more from the LP side, at least within our audience. There's so much of this that I think the wider world needs to know, but obviously given the quality of conversation to protect confidentiality, like I understand that you do need to limit the splash damage, so to speak.
People can go and request an invite. People who are in the room, get to see that. And, I try to let as many in as we can. We'll be a little bit bigger this year. I mean, we do everything for free. And I think that's actually like really important for what we're trying to accomplish. That, again, like when you're staying at a hostel while you're raising your fund, like, I don't want to be charging people $200 a ticket for it. Like, this doesn't need to be something that we ever make money on. Like, and I do think like that's the difference between like making this like, a community initiative that we do rather than an investment. Like, people always ask me like, oh, how are you going to go monetize that? Like, that's not the intention. Like, I think, realize, I think having a space that, managers can come together and do, be vulnerable is something really important to me. And I do think creating more commonality between LPs and GPs is just an incredibly important thing. So we make our audience 50-50. And I think that's incredibly important because, I have a friend who, is head of private equity at one of the biggest, university endowments in the country. And I remember seeing him at a conference, and he's like surrounded by like $10 million funds, like, tiny little, funds. We're like, oh yeah, I'd love for you to, consider investing. Like, you could have stacked up all those funds next to each other, and like he couldn't have written a check that would have like, like the smallest check he can write is $50 million. So that's pointless on his side. It's pointless for the founders, or sorry, the emerging managers. So, I think we flip these power dynamics a little bit. Like, oh wait, like, there's like 50 university endowments here. Like, I don't need to go talk to, the top 10 one. Like, I probably actually do a better job with this, like, the one that's the 40th largest endowment that actually can write a $5 million check, or, hey, here's a family office here, and so forth. But also I do think it puts it, everyone in a different mindset when they're like, oh, actually, like, I'm not the only big name LP here. There's a bunch of other LPs that I'm sitting between, like, one of the top fund of funds and, this family office that's, Incliner One and yada, yada, yada. And I think that really changes the conversations that people are having, that puts them in the space to be much more open, that they don't feel like they're being attacked. Like, everyone's been in a conference where they've like probably flipped over their name tag. They're just like, I need some space. I don't want to talk to anybody. Like, at least I'm like an incredible introvert, and like that's how I feel at a lot of conferences. And this is a space where like, you're like, oh man, like that's a huge asset allocator, and they're just like chilling in the corner. People aren't bothering them, because they're getting some work done, or they're meeting up with some other friends. And I think that is, I really want to maintain that, of having that balance of like, GPs and LPs being together. And that's been core to Equal, like that balance of like making sure it's not founder friendly, investor friendly, LP friendly, but just friendly. And it's the same way that we've tried to flip things, which like, lately we've been doing these reverse pitches with LPs. And if anyone in your audience ever has interest in doing one, like, please hit me up. But we basically, instead of GPs pitching LPs, we actually will have an LP pitch the group, and we'll have 3 LPs, not 1, 3, to kind of like, further kind of, tear down those boundaries. And it'll be a top foundation, endowment, family office, saying like, okay, here's what we really do. Like, here's what we really want to invest in. Like, here's the stuff I can't say publicly, of like what our pacing is, our check size, what our process is. And here's the reason why you should take our money. Like, and if you happen to be a fund that's like doing this, like, I really would like to see a sub $30 million fund doing a deep tech fund or crypto or whatever it is, or hey, if you're not at least $250 million, it's just not going to happen. Like, we can say that we'll stay in touch, but like, if you're not going to get there, like, our check sizes are too big. Like, this is just a waste of time. So we do that like pitch, and we'll have 3 LPs pitch, and we do this once a month, and we'll have like 150, 200 GPs, like, come on these calls. And, then we make it open Q&A, like, of like, I moderate all the questions. But I find it like so amazing, actually, just like, all right, like most of these people have never pitched. Like, an LP doesn't need pitch. They're used to seeing 1,000 pitches.
Yeah.
But then we'll actually go and facilitate a double opt-in intro of like, okay, if you think that foundation is a good fit for you, like fill out this information and we will go and send it to that. And they'll, all these LPs will get like 60, 70 funds that they match with, and fills up their top of funnel without them having to send a tweet out or like post anything publicly. And, we know that a couple $100 million has been allocated to folks through that because like the LPs will follow up and be like, hey, like I actually just like committed to that fund. Like, thanks for the intro. I'm like, yeah, hopefully this guy sent us a bottle of wine.
If not more.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing because I know so many of these multifamily office or these broker dealers who actually charge a fee on this, and it's less friendly.
Yeah.
And
don't get me started on that. Like, I think this is the reason why, like, the second that you have to be profit seeking on something, it like loses so much of its beauty. Like, truthfully, I think like all of venture, like we should just make money on carry, not on fees. Like, and that's because I think venture should not be an asset class. It is something that needs to stay craft. It needs to stay the way it is. And there's other forms of, asset management and private equity and so forth that are just very, very different. But I wish that there was less of a focus on that fee stream and profits. Like I was at dinner last night where people were saying, how private equity firms, private equity venture are getting valued, and 17 times fee stream. And that's just so stupid that like we're actually evaluating a firm based on the multiple of its fee stream, rather than like their performance against the public market equivalent. And that seems crazy to me. Like, but my hope is that venture can go more to that over time. But unfortunately, I'm wrong, and it's going to be.
You may not be wrong. It's just not. It's a non-consensus thing. And when there's incentives,
it's 100% going that way, and it's the most terrifying thing. Like we will have a conversation about this, like at EMC that like I've put together, because like I do think there's even more and more of a bifurcation between like, look, if you work at Lightspeed, that is so different than like what we are here. I'm taking out the trash here. The reality is we're a startup. We have a very minimal fee stream.
You got the brick wall behind you.
We got the brick wall. I got a radiator right next to me. I got the Gorilla Glue to fix the chairs when they break. And we do that stuff. And that's just very different than if you're managing several $1 billion. And even if we had the opportunity that, I never wanted to be Lightspeed or Intrusive or, whatever. Like I looked at USV and IA and Emergence Capital. I'm like, man, like those guys have figured it out because they're 20 backing funds left and right. And, I find that to be more exciting and exhilarating, but the industry is moving towards like this massive, capital event. So I think like LPs that invest in mega funds, that's fine. Like I completely understand the time and place in a portfolio as an asset allocator to do that. But investing in a sub $250 million fund is just categorically very, very different than investing in a several $1 billion fund. And, I think so much alpha is, going to be generated by the emerging managers, that it's really a crime that those, so much of the venture allocation is getting sucked up by like 10, 15 firms that are, raising $6 to $10 billion funds. So.
And not to defend large LPs too much, but sometimes they're deploying $1 billion into venture and private equity a year, and they only have 4 people on the team, and they don't have the bandwidth to write 100 checks per se.
Right into a fund of funds that can do that. I mean, I've seen the returns of some of these fund funds, and what I would say is, like in general, LPs do not get paid enough. Yeah. And I think if LPs got paid appropriately,
that's a hot take, mic drop moment.
Yeah. There are fund of funds that have way better returns than venture funds, and those fund of funds get a much, much, much smaller means of compensation, for being paid for the work. Like at the end of the day, if you're delivering 30% IRRs, like pay those people. And I think if LPs were paid appropriately in the market, we'd see more competition in the LP landscape. But I think that there's such aversion to paying fees on top of fees in the asset management business. If there's any place that it should be at, it's in venture capital. because the dispersion of returns in private equity hedge fund, like there's a pretty, narrow band that everyone falls in, and it's going to track within like one standard deviation of the public market equivalents for that asset class. In venture, it's everything is in the tails. So manager selection is the only thing that matters. And so, instead of putting on, $100 million into, one of these mega like venture firms, give $100 million to a fund of funds, or SMA account or something else like that to someone who will go and, do an emerging manager program. Because I think like that's how you're going to get access to the next IA. That's how you're going to get access to the next USB. That's how you're going to see, some of those like 20 bagger funds. And if nothing else, like have a chance at a 10, 20 bagger fund rather than just like knowing that you're going to get a 2X, because like there's plenty of places that you can get 2X in a portfolio. If you're going to take all that liquidity risk, you're going to take all the market risk, if you're going to deal with all like the bullshit that you can deal with in venture, like you might as well be compensated for, that risk by getting the chance at a big reward, which, it's just, how do you 20 bag a $5 billion fund? Like I can't even think of the numbers that enable you to achieve that.
Yeah.
Like, $100 million fund is pretty hard to do too. So the smaller funds, like you think of early Ribbit, you think of that early initialized fund, that early, lower case fund, like it's just like, man, those are insane returns that they had, but then everyone gets incentivized to get too big. Yeah. And, if we found better structures to keep things small, I think this would be a better industry overall.
I agree. We're also in the back half of the conversation, like before this turns into a Lex Fridman podcast, which I'd gladly do with you any day, but both of us are limited by schedule. I'd love to like talk about a couple like hot takes, and you give me your like longer than 140 characters kind of spiel on those hot takes. We can round it out with
probably lukewarm takes, but like, let's see if we can spice them up.
We'll see if we can spice them up. We'll see. We'll let the audience decide, right? We'll have the peanut gallery. So let me start with the first one. This is actually something we had right before I clicked record, and this is fascinating to me. Feel free to elaborate as much or as little as you want. Seed stage is the worst stage to be investing into.
Yeah. This is not a subjective opinion. Like it's completely data driven at this point. Like there was analysis that we did dating back to last year's AGM. We just had our AGM like a month ago, but like the year before, I tracked what the premium was between a late stage valuation and seed stage valuation. So like think about if late stage valuation was 200 million, seed stage value was 10, you're getting a 20x multiple.
Right.
Like that delta. And historically, if you look at the last 10 years of data, it would suggest that multiple should hover around 20 to 25 times. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense when you're thinking about, okay, the risk of a startup succeeding and going from seed stage to late stage, the dilution as well as the cost of capital that you have to like from a time basis, like you need to be compensated for your risk. So if something is the winner that gets to that stage after dilution, failure rates and so forth, maybe you can 3-4x. In 2021, that number hit 42 times. So like incredible time to be a seed investor.
Right.
Like, and we saw that we had invested in companies at like single digit valuations that were, now getting valued in hundreds of millions, maybe billion. And things felt good. And then as we've seen that market unwind, last year that number was around 8. So like it literally experienced an 80% decline of what the premium is. Yeah. I mean, you're like, wait, you're only getting like 8 times for a seed stage investment, failure rates, the time that you need to spend, dilution 8 times to get to a late stage. Like you're way better off being a late stage investor. Like that is what the market is saying right now. People should be late stage investing. Challenge is LPs don't want late stage investing. They want seed investing. Yeah. And it turns out that it's the barriers to entry of starting a seed fund are way lower than starting a growth stage fund. So growth stage is dormant, very few funds, extremely challenging to find leads, very little deal activity, that's happening there. Fortunately, we've been able to get some fundraising rounds done on the backs of some great entrepreneurs, but seed stage, ruthless. Like, everyone's getting 9 term sheets if there's anything. Like, I just heard of another company that's like, did a super buzzy seed round, and then like 2 months later, it just got a round done. It is pre-revenue with 2 people at 300 million. And then you see that in AI, you see it in crypto, you see it in enterprise SaaS. It's every segment and corner of the market. Yeah, and when you think of, wow, like you're making a double down decision at a $300 million as seeds manager, like you have zero ownership at that point. Like, you know, on a small fund size, and if the window of opportunity isn't absolutely perfect, like you're going to lose money on those funds. So I think like we, as a firm, like that's not to say like, we again said this at our AGM, seed stage is the worst stage to invest. And I would say, I say that to all our LPs, right? That said, that is our entry point into companies. And we have doubled down into our companies thoughtfully, rigorously. And A and B have been great entry points for us in our companies. One of our first opportunity investments, like we plowed into it at the A, plowed into it at B, just raised the Series C. Like, that like we think that ends up being, attractive. But the entry points that you have to play at seed are just insanely stupid right now. And so I really wish LPs would spend more time investing in growth stage. Managers, I think there's an amazing opportunity for more growth stage capital in this market. Especially now that a lot of the crossover players are gone.
Yeah, there's a lot of LP capital going towards like company secondaries and fund secondaries, though. So
yeah, because a lot of funds are going to die,
yeah.
And a lot of folks need liquidity. So I think I don't love that strategy personally. I think it's a great way to make money. I just don't see how it's very cyclical.
Yeah.
And I think if you're an LP, like there's ways that you can do that, but I don't know. I get hit up by all those firms, and it very much feels like investment banking. And if the best companies you're going to hold through cycles. So I do think that there's some adverse selection. The question is it adverse selection on the company or is it adverse selection on the manager? And we're hopeful that doesn't happen in either case for us. But there are plenty of people that like are managers that cannot raise, and they need liquidity, or they're not, and they have great underlying companies, and I think that's where secondary can make a lot of sense. But if you see great managers selling their companies and folks who have liquidity, like probably got to question why.
I agree. All right, to keep things moving and also to be cognizant of time. There's a Rick Zullo post that I really liked on LinkedIn earlier this year, which is, you said there are precisely 4 ways to deliver alpha in investing: asymmetric information, asymmetric insight, asymmetric value add, asymmetric access. I think some of them are a little bit more obvious than others, but I'm curious, to be more surgical here, what does it mean for you? How do you demystify asymmetric insight and asymmetric value add?
Yeah. So, this was something that like we started talking a lot about at our last offsite. Like asymmetric everything is like a big part of our strategy, and the heart of that, and really the core of our business is this concept of prepared mind. And so when we think of what our founders need, they need us to know the market as well as they do, and if they really want a true partner. And I think like we are a partner model. Do not invest, we partner with founders. And, with that, like, almost like 50% of the companies that we do now are like pre-day zero. We're helping someone start the company. So, I think we are extremely research intensive. I would put the research that we do as a team within our sectors up against any hedge fund. And we spend a lot of time with people on the public side, and we spend a lot of time with sell side analysts, to collect information, and with folks in industries like we will spend a lot of money to test out, ideas to get data points, as a hedge fund would. And we do think that's what really develops the proprietary insight, which like, I don't think deal flow is ever proprietary, but, we spend a lot of time to, look in the crystal ball and see where our market is heading. And I think some of those are things that can become fairly obvious. But if we are right in picking out market opportunities, before they are known to the broader set of the market, we can plant our flag, on that. And we've done that on a couple of our concepts. So like we've published our theses, on things like the inventory apocalypse. Turned out we were right. When there was $300, $400 billion of structural returns in excess inventory in the market every year, we guessed, based on a bunch of analysis, that number had a chance to double. It's actually quadrupled. And we've made a bunch of bets aligned with that thesis, and they've done incredibly well. And we planted our flag and said, okay, anything in this space, we know what we are talking about. And I think when you know what you're talking about and the market knows what you're talking about, you have the opportunity to do two things from the value add perspective. And that's one, you can be a really thoughtful partner to those founders. You can talk to the industry, dynamics with them. You know their customer base. You can connect them with customers. You can connect them with partners. You have a sense of what are the talent and capabilities that they need on the team. I think this is true. Truthfully, the Valley has been very, very good at doing this for traditional enterprise IT companies for a very, very long time. I just don't think that they're equipped with a prepared mind for anything outside of enterprise IT, and that's what's led to insurance companies, and freight brokers and other things that are in the universe that we do, the kind of real world economy, to be misguided in a bunch of ways. So our belief is that we have provided, that prepared mind enables that, ability to add the traditional venture, value add. But I also think that the number one secret in venture is take something that's not consensus and make it consensus. And I do think we benefit from the fact that our research is more public now, that people know that if we've done something in space, that we've met with the 25, 30 companies that are doing that, that we have a bunch of customers lined up for, and if they're going to make a bet against one of our companies and a competitor, they better back up the truck because, we're going to bring some firepower for it. And I do think setting a little of that signaling for our companies has made it easier for them to raise downstream capital, because, we've had some of our research reports viewed several 100,000 times and probably several thousand times by the same, investment firms who are just
right.
I like this idea. When you find something here, call us. And thus far, every deal that I've done for our firm has, raised following capital. Yeah. So we think that that's not because we have an amazing network. I think we've partnered with great companies that people like those ideas, and it makes it easier for them to raise. So.
I freaking love it. I wish we could expand on that more. But to round the corner and to get ready for the curtain call here, maybe one last one. I want to talk about board construction in general. And something you mentioned in an interview last year, which I found to be very prescient, was most people aren't talking about who's going to be in the VC industry in 3 to 5 years. And so I'm curious, whether it's the recommendation you give to founders or even to kind of emerging managers and their LPACs, right? Because at larger institutions, the succession that, talent goes through at these larger institutions happens so frequently, or rather frequently. What is the advice you give when it comes to, how should you think about who should I bring on my board and what can I ask of my board members?
I think board dynamics are one of the scariest things in venture capital right now. 5 years ago, I was the youngest, greenest person on every single board. And, so now I've been on 15, 16 boards. I've seen companies shut down. I've seen, companies sell. I've seen companies go through ups and downs, near-death experiences, and then, flying too close to the sun. I'm still very much a novice compared to the first board I was ever on was with a guy named Peter Barris. Peter was managing partner of NEA for 20 years. He's probably been on 20 public company boards. That guy was amazing. He was a diesel. I learned so much from Peter. It's incredible. And the reality is, I'm not Peter Barris, and I could work my entire career and I'll probably never live up to being as good as Peter was. But I look at now, and so many great ones are out of the industry. You have probably most of the best investors, guys like Peter, are no longer taking board seats. Bill Gurley's no longer taking board seats. Roger Ehrenberg's no longer taking board seats. Fred Wilson's no longer taking board seats, largely. Yeah, and I think that changes the dynamic pretty heavily. And then you add that with this transition that's happening across these firms, where people are jumping firms every 2 years, especially at the mega funds. And it just makes it extremely difficult, where we've had multiple companies where the Series A or Series B lead has left within a year of doing the deal.
Yeah.
We have one of our companies where the Series A and Series B lead, both of them have left. And as well as our Series C co-investor left too. So I think that makes it that's really hard on a company. And I think one of the challenges that you need to be thinking about in the entrepreneur is like, who's my rock? Who's my anchor? Who's going to be there, no matter what? And, one of the things that we preach to founders is like, look, like, unless Rick gets hit by a bus, like, he's going to be here. Like, and, hopefully I don't, like, knock on wood, but, even if one of our team members leaves, like, they know that, like, and that's part of, like, we want multiple hats on the ball so that, like, if one person ends up going to raise a fund or doing something, I never want to prevent people from missing opportunities, but, they'll know at least if you're a emerging manager, if you're the founder of the firm, you're going to be there to retire. And I got to make a lot more money before I have the opportunity to retire. And so, I'm going to be here for a long time. And so I think that dynamic, if you're a founder, you really need to be thinking like, who's going to be there through the good, the bad, the ugly? Yeah. Because when things are going great, many people are there to claim success. When things are tough, that's when you really need your board members. And I do find I have seen companies killed by bad board members. I've seen companies really impaled by bad board members. I've also seen companies saved by amazing board members, and I've seen Peter save a company. Like, I am hopeful that one day I have done 1/10 as good of directorship as Peter Bears has, and if I have, like, I'll consider that a win.
Just another follow up to that. What does it look like for a board member to save a company? Like when you've seen that, what are examples of that?
I can't go into the specifics of what Peter did in that case.
Yeah,
I would say
no Peter, no like.
I would say every other board member on the planet would have been like, this does not make sense financially. This is not going to yield fruit in our fund. It's time to shut down this company and move on. And that would have been the economically right decision,
right?
For a bunch of different reasons. For when I've seen this happen in the short term, but the reality is the best board members like Peter. The thing that I strive for as a board member is to make sure that you're making the best long-term decision. And being able to go help the founders through the hardest time, even when it's not in your short-term incentive structure. Can the company that works on together is tens of millions of revenue. Like, it's still like unlikely to move the needle in a major way. For what NEA, that fund was a huge fund, but incredible impact on the founders.
Yeah,
completely changes their lives, going from like a startup failure to a company with tens of millions of revenue. Had a huge impact on me, and had a huge impact on our fund, Lightbank, and because we own a larger chunk of that company on a smaller fund size. So as I think of that, making decisions like that, and Fred Wilson, has shared this philosophy of like you earn your reputation not on your winners, but how you help the companies that aren't the winners. Let's not call them losers, but I think it's those moments that you really show how amazing you can be as a board member. Those aren't the ones that are going to be your 1,000-bagger returns. That but those are the ones that earn you your reputation and hopefully get you to 1,000-baggers. And I think operating with integrity is a very, very, very long business. But when folks like Peter, they set the standard for doing that. And when you save a company like that, it's going to be something that 10 years later, people are still talking about it, saying, man, I would partner up with Peter Barris on any deal that he ever did.
Whew. So much good stuff here. Penultimate question here. Last question is always like, how do people find you? But penultimate question, you're obviously known for the EMC, you're known for Equal, you're known for a lot of just being a great investor, but you're also a bunch of things outside of investing, right? So as an avid guitarist...
Not really.
No, you are. Like, I'll just list a couple, right? You're an avid guitarist, you're a Yankees fan, you're a part-time dino rancher, you're a fantasy football nerd, and you're someone who's met their soulmate on a fateful December 7th at a fundraiser in DC, a lifelong The Strokes fan, ever since you tried to get on an 18-plus venue as a 15-year-old. someone who spent more on your children's like education and childcare in 2022 than you had salary for, and a home brewer for his latest, batch of craft beer. And there's so many things out there. And so if there's anything the world should know about you but does not, whether it's those things I just mentioned, what should they know about you?
That I get way too much credit for what we do here. Like, I think because I write, because I'm the founder here, I get to take credit for the contributions of a lot of amazing folks, which are more introverted research folks. I'm encouraging them to write and tweet a little bit more so they can increase their public profile. But I think a lot of people are like, oh man, like, Rick is like working, he must work 3,000 hours, a week, because like all these things are happening at these companies. And it turns out that I've just become really good at taking credit for like what other people do. So, I think, the reality is if, anyone sees it or our team members, make sure that they're getting the credit that they are properly due, since I think they all have to do the Lord's work of not only working a venture, but dealing with my crazy ass. So they're managing me, which is a job that I personally wouldn't want. So
I love it. Rick, thank you so much. And as the last thing, as I mentioned earlier, like, you're in a lot of places. You're on Twitter, you're on LinkedIn. Obviously, your email's out in the nebula as well. Like, but if LPs have questions, if LPs want to, like, I want to pitch my fund at the EMC, or if other GPs out there want to get more involved or ask you questions as follow-up to this conversation, how do people best find you?
Yeah. One rule at EMC is neither side is allowed to pitch anything. It's about connection, not pitching. But I'm against pitching. Like,
I stand corrected.
When LPs do it, I'll allow it. But at any rate, we try to make ourselves extremely accessible. So, my email is on our website. It's my last name at equal.vc. Because people have been calling me Zullo since it was 10.
Zullo has a nice ring.
LinkedIn. It's nice. It's easy to find, when you're checking in, because it's always going to be the last name. It makes things nice and easy. So, but at any rate, we are extremely accessible. We love spending time with LPs, especially if we want to engage in things like the emerging manager circle. We love connecting them with members from our group, and doing so in a manner that, hopefully they find it matches the people who are right for them. Not just, the same household names that they're used to. So.
Rick, I appreciate you as always. Superclusters is where it is today because of you and people like you. So I just want to say a big thank you. I'll give more in the introduction, obviously, but thank you so much.
Giving far too much credit, as you do a great job, and excited to listen to this one and see what actually makes it. So thank you for having me. So.
I want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Alchemist Accelerator. Backed by the likes of Khosla Ventures, Mayfield, Salesforce, just to name a few, Alchemist is the top B2B startup accelerator that's been around since 2012, backing founders from day one. And if you've been around for 12 years and running laser focused only on one industry, you build this incredible set of flywheels, and positive feedback loop is absolutely insane. We back the best enterprise talent who go on to change the world in which we live in, who then come back to their hometown, coach, and mentor the next generation of world-class enterprise talent. And don't take it just from me. Alchemist has backed the likes of LaunchDarkly, Rigetti, Privacera, Mo, Engage, FarmWise, just to name a few, many of which who have come back as mentors and coaches for the current classes of Alchemist. If you're curious and want to get more involved in the Alchemist ecosystem, check out alchemistaccelerator.com/superclusters. That's an S at the beginning, an S at the end, and we'll include the link in the show notes below. Till next, stay awesome. Hey Superclusters fans, David from Post here, and if you're tuning in from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts find your ear, it'd mean the world to me if you left a review. For those from the YouTube universe, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with just one other person who'd get a kick out of today's topics. I'm on the road to publishing to at least 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more helpful, exciting, and fun for you. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of Alchemist Accelerator. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. See you on the next.